A true footballer doesn't just play with his feet, he plays with his mind. He thinks quickly, has vision, and uses his intelligence to control not only his space, but the entire field.
In this After Effects tutorial, we'll learn how to create animations, Julián Alborná style. I'll also show you how to create these fantastic shadows and the incredible halftone textures so characteristic of his reels. I'll tell you everything from scratch in this tutorial. By the way, if you want to support the channel, in addition to your likes, you can also do it from my Patreon page. There, I share with you all the projects I use in the tutorials, so you can keep practicing and learning. I leave the link in the description if you want to take a look. As in other tutorials, the first thing I'll do is import the files. Using our friend Zavat's script command, I'll have everything organized from the start. This folder will be for the compositions, and with it selected, I'll create the first one. It'll be called Placeholder (1080 by 1350) with 30 frames and 20 seconds left. Here, everyone can add the image they prefer. By the way, if you like documentary-style editing, my course is now available. But it's not just a course in which I show you how to animate a sequence in After Effects and that's it, but I show you the entire procedure that I followed to create this animation. From the initial idea to the final render, going through each and every phase of the creative process. I'll leave the link in the description in case you want to take a look. This other composition will be called Placeholder Comp, and everything will stay as is. Here, we add the placeholder and go to Illustrator. We'll create a 1080 by 1350 file with these settings. Now, with the rectangle tool, we'll create a shape like this. We'll activate the fill and deactivate the stroke. To do this accurately, we need to have Smart Guides enabled. If this pink line doesn't appear, you need to go to View and activate Smart Guides. With the white arrow, we'll select the entire rectangle. And using this handle that appears in the corners, we'll round the edges. I'll set this value to 200 pixels. If we hold down the Alt key and click on any of them, we can invert the roundness or leave it completely straight. Now we go to Object, Path, Offset. If we increase this value, the offset will be outward, and if we set it to negative, it will be inward. I'll set it to -30. Now we have two shapes. We'll change their colors to differentiate them. If the layers don't appear, you can activate them in Window Layers. I'll deactivate this shape for now, and this other one, using the Direct Selection tool, I'll select and copy it with Ctrl+C. Returning to After Effects, with the Pen tool and without having any layers selected, click anywhere in the image. Now we paste the shape we created in Illustrator. We remove the stroke and add a fill. We need to make this placeholder composition an alpha matte of the shape. Perfect. Let's create another composition called Scene 01. (1920 by 1080). Everything else stays as is, and here we'll add this other one. We scale it to 40% and return to Illustrator. We're going to cut this other shape in half. We'll create a shape like this. If the Pathfinder tool doesn't appear, go to Window Pathfinder. From all these options, choose this one. We select the entire shape and copy it. Now, in After Effects, Click anywhere in the image with the pen tool and copy the shape. We rename it left, remove the fill, and add a stroke. For now, I'll leave it at 10 pixels to make it clearer. We need to set the anchor point for the shape on the right side. With the pan behind tool and the control key pressed, we do it very precisely. We center the shape and also set the scale to 40%. This way, we get this border that can be seen outside the image. If we select the pen tool and hover over the path, a plus sign will appear. When it appears, we mark a new point. Now, with the Alt key pressed, we select these two, right-click, and deactivate the closed option. We also delete this point. We add the trim paths effect to this shape, and at the beginning of the timeline, we set the end property to 0. We mark a keyframe, and at about the second 208, we put this value back to 100. We smooth the keyframes, and with a right click, we set the influence to 70%. We duplicate the shape, flip it horizontally, and rename it right. Let's expand on contents. And with the path selected, open the Create Nulls from Paths script. Of these three options, choose Nulls Follow Points. This will create a null at each point of the path. But we'll only need the top and bottom ones, so we'll delete them all. We'll rename these two as upright and downright. We'll do the same with the left path. This is perhaps the most complex part of the tutorial, since this script will generate many nulls, and it's easy to get confused. But if you have any questions, write to me and we'll sort them out. We'll rename these as up left and down left. We'll do a small animation for these paths. We'll move to the second point too and mark a keyframe in that position. Now, at the fourth point, we'll animate them this way. We'll move this one slightly to the right and this one slightly to the left. We smooth the keyframes and right-click to modify the influence on the curves. Perfect. We position ourselves over these keyframes, select the placeholder composition, and cut it right there. I'm going to rename it right. Look, if this prompt appears, select all these layers and place them on top. I'm not sure why, but it works. Let's now activate the grid and close the script for now. Select the rectangle tool, and to create the mask accurately, we need to have Snap to Grid enabled. Okay, but first, we need to select the composition we want to mask. There it is, right in the middle. Change the mask mode to Subtract. Duplicate the composition, and set this mask to Add. rename this composition to left. Now, with the Pick Whip tool, we parent them to their respective paths. Perfect. With a right click, we create a shape layer that will serve as a reference. Add an ellipse and a fill. Let's leave it like this for now to better see what we're doing. Without having any layers selected, we use the pen tool and create a path. It doesn't matter what it looks like, just make sure it has 2 points. We rename it as Path 01. Change its color and display its properties. We have to have the path selected. We open the script again, and this time, we'll choose the first option, Points Follow Nulls. This creates a null at each end of the path. This null here will be parented to the shape, and this other one to the center, so we rename them that way. We paint the 3 layers the same color, and now we'll parent the null called center to our reference circle using Pick Whip. We have to hold down the Alt and Shift keys. This way, this null automatically acquires all the position properties of the central circle. We'll parent this other null to the one called Up Left. Perfect. Let's continue. To avoid repeating this process every time, we duplicate these 3 layers and change some settings. I have to parent this null to the one below, but as you can see, the path doesn't follow the null. So here in these options, we choose Shape 02, which is the name of this null. Just like we did before, we have to parent this null to the one called Down Left. We duplicate it and repeat the process. I'm going to parent this null to this other one, but here I have to change it to Shape 03, which is the name of this null. We select it and parent it to Down Right. We duplicate it again and repeat this process. We parent this null to the one called Upright. We duplicate the 3 layers again. In this option, we choose Shape 5, which is the name of the null. And this time, I want to parent this null to the anchor point of this shape, which you can see where we have it. So, just like before, we select it and, using Pick Whip, parent it to the shape's anchor point, called Right. We duplicate these 3 layers once more, and do the same with the shape on the left. Here, we select Shape 6 and parent it to the shape's anchor point on the left. To hide the paths from the front, we select all these layers and place them at the top. We place the circle layer below the compositions. We've finished this animation, but we need to make some adjustments. I'm going to change the color of this circle to a fairly dark gray, and I'm going to copy this color to apply to all the paths as well. I'm going to set the thickness to 3.5 for these two. I want it to be very thin. We select all these paths, give them the same color, and set the stroke thickness to 1.5. I'm going to scale the central circle at 15%. To give all these paths a little movement, I'm going to write the wiggle expression at the circle's position. So that these paths aren't visible here at first, I'm going to select them and cut them right here at the 2-second mark, which is when the animation starts. I'm going to create a composition called montage, and everything will stay as is. Here, I'm going to set scene 01, and so that this background I used as a reference isn't visible, I'm going to enter the composition and make this layer a guide so that it's only visible here. I'm going to create another composition called brain, and this will be for the 3D model. Click on this option and click OK. Center the anchor point and also center the object in view. Now we're going to do a little animation with the orientation. At the beginning of the timeline, set these values, mark a keyframe, and at the 2-second mark, change the orientation. We smooth the keyframes and set the handles to 45% and 100% influence. So we have a curve like this. This other composition will be for the 3D eye. We'll leave everything as is. We click on this option. For now, we'll set the scale to 75. If we need to modify it, we'll do so in a moment. With the right click, we create a null and set the effect to slider control. We rename it X, duplicate it, and set the copy to Z. We deploy the rotation, and in X we're going to write wiggle open parenthesis, 1 comma, close parenthesis. And now placing the cursor between the comma and the parenthesis, we're going to parenthesize the pick whip to the X slider. If we modify this value, the eye will rotate randomly on that axis. We do the same on the Z axis. Placing the cursor between the comma and the parenthesis, we parenthesize the pick whip to the Z slider. In second one, we're going to enter these values. We mark a keyframe in both. Now in second two, we set them back to 0 so that the eye stays in its original position. Finally, we smooth the keyframes. I'm going to bring in the audio track, and with the L key twice, we display the waves.
A true footballer doesn't just play with his feet, he plays with his mind. He plays with his mind.
Over this part, I'm going to write some text, and I'm going to make some adjustments to create a bit of contrast between the words. Now later, I'll leave it well positioned. I'm going to put this texture below, and I'm also going to reduce the scale. We'll place this brain composition below scene 01 and set the scale to 60%. Later, we'll add shadow effects and all that. For now, we'll just place the elements and animate the camera. We'll animate the opacity property for this text, setting it to 0. We'll deploy it in the range selector and mark a keyframe on start.
He plays with his mind.
Guided by the audio, we'll set this value to 100 when the text has finished saying this sentence.
With his mind.
Here in Advanced, we change letters to words so that it's revealed word by word.
With his mind.
Right-click, create a 35mm camera and a node. Okay, here it tells us to convert the layers to 3D. No problem. We create a null object, convert it to 3D, and parent the camera to it. At second 4, we'll mark a keyframe, and at the beginning of the timeline, we'll set a value of -500 on the Z-axis. We smooth the keyframes and give the curve this shape, starting very quickly and ending very slowly. We activate 2 views. I have this viewer here in the left view. Now we'll move the text a little forward on the Z-axis to create the parallax effect. We hover over the last keyframe and duplicate the null. We delete these and mark a new one. This animation will start at 225, and we parent the previous null to the new one. At second 617, we move the camera on the Y-axis, set a value of -280. We smooth the keyframes and set the influence to 75% for both handles. We'll add the CC reptile effect to this texture to fill in all these empty spaces. We set a value of 2000 pixels on all sides and change from repeat to unfold.
He thinks quickly, has vision.
We're now at this peak, which is where the animation goes the fastest. And we'll cut all these layers at that point and delete them. Well, we'll extend the texture layer and cut it again, and we'll place this part up here. We'll paint these 4 layers that belong to the same scene the same color. I'll put a marker here to mark the transition. We'll also cut the camera at this point and activate 2 views to better see what's happening. We'll set a Z value of -1110. Now, we'll center this texture with Control plus Home, so it'll be positioned right in front of the camera viewfinder. Now we'll add this PNG, and at the last keyframe, we'll convert it to 3D and center it in the view. We'll also add a fill effect to lighten the black color a bit. This is a PNG of a soccer field. I'm going to leave it as is. I'm also going to cut the layer right here at the transition. Now, let's bring in the eye composition. Convert it to 3D and center it in the viewport here on the last keyframe. We set the scale to 84. And so that these imperfect edges of the eye aren't visible, we select the ellipse tool. With the composition selected, we create a mask like this. Now the edges look perfect. We paint these layers the same color and duplicate the null to make another movement. We delete these keyframes and mark new ones in position and Z rotation. We parent the previous null to the new one. And this animation will start at 4:16. As I always say, I set these values and this timing because, after doing some tests, they're the ones that have worked best for me. We advance to 8:23 and set it to 180. On the Z-axis, we'll zoom in a bit, setting it to 840. It should stay more or less within this safety margin. We smooth out these keyframes and set the influence to 75% for all the handles. We should see a curve like this. To make the next transition, we're going to position ourselves here again at the highest point of the curve. And right there, we're going to cut these layers, but we're not going to delete them. We're going to place them on top. We're going to replace this composition with the brain composition. We select it and, holding down the Alt key, replace it. Okay, now we need to adjust the scale and rotation. We're going to create another composition called Final Circle, 1500 by 1500, and everything else will stay as is. Here, we're going to double-click the ellipse tool and give it a color more or less like this. We'll place this composition on top here and convert it to 3D. So that it acquires all the positioning properties of the brain composition, holding down the Control and Shift keys. We're going to parent it to that layer. It will automatically position us exactly where that composition is. If we want, we can remove the parent link. Now, to make the transition match perfectly, I'll lower the opacity of the circle to give it the same scale as the 3D eye. We put the opacity back to 100. This composition has to start right here at the transition. Here, I'm going to put another marker. We duplicate this layer and turn this one off for now. We'll replace this other one with another texture. Hold down the Alt key and replace it. We add a tint effect to this texture and darken the white color quite a bit. We'll duplicate this null to make another movement. We'll delete these keyframes and mark a new one in position. We'll parent the previous one to the new one. This animation will start at 6:15. We'll advance to 9:20 and move the x-axis a little to the right until it more or less stays within this safety margin. We smooth them out and set the influence to 65% for this one, so we have a curve like this. To make the last movement, we don't need to create more nulls. We can do it with this one. We'll set it to 1110 and zoom back in. Here in Z, we'll set it to -2000 and in X190. Now, we'll scale this soccer field layer a little until all the lines are visible. So that the camera doesn't stop when it reaches this point, I'm going to move the keyframe a little to the right. And without moving the head from there, I'm going to mark a new one. I'm going to set this one to 1225, and now I'm going to enter the graphics editor to make some adjustments. We smooth these two with F9, set the influence to 65% for this handle. We double-click again and lock the continuous box. Now we're going to move this handle up a little to create this slope so the camera movement will look much smoother. For this group of layers in the third scene, I'm going to change the color. Standing here in the last keyframe, we're going to create some text. We'll set different sizes for the text to create contrast. And with the eyedropper, we're going to give it the same color as this circle. We'll convert it to 3D and center it in the viewport. We also need to correct the rotation. Well, here I see that the text layer is creating a parallax effect, and I don't want that. I want it to be at the same depth and Z as the brain composition. I'm going to place this layer on top, and now, holding down the Control and Shift keys, I'm going to parent the text to this composition so that it acquires all its properties. Now we're going to move it a little to the left on the x-axis, although we can make some changes later if necessary. I'm going to darken this layer a little more, and now, let's preview everything to see how we're doing. Okay, we're doing well, but we need to make some adjustments. This brain composition has to start at the second for the animation to be visible. I'm going to cut this text layer by the second transition and give it the same color as the layers in its group. We've already animated the camera and placed all the elements. So now we're going to start adding details and effects. I'm going to change the color of this text and move it below the brain composition. Now, I'm going to create a circle like this with the ellipse tool, center the anchor point, rename it, and convert it to 3D. Now, we're going to place it in the same position as the brain composition as we did previously. Hold down the Control and Shift keys to parent the pick whip to this composition. There we have it, but we're going to move it below. I'm going to keep only this layer for a better view. Expand the contents and right-click to convert the ellipse path to curves. Now with the pen tool, we'll select these 2 points, right-click, and deactivate the closed option. We'll also delete this node. Click on it to create this shape. We'll create a mask for it by clicking on this icon. We put it in subtract mode and increase the depth quite a bit. I'll set it to about 1,000. Now we'll do a little animation on the Z rotation. A little after the second transition here at this point, we mark a keyframe and set the rotation to 70 degrees. We move forward a little and set it to 0. And at the end of the animation, we set it to -1, so it makes a complete turn. We smooth the keyframes and give the curve a little shape. We'll set the influence to 75 for this handle. We'll set it to 45 for this one. And we'll also set a value of 75 for this other one. And we'll activate the continuous option. We'll make the text layer an alpha matte of this shape. And we need to make it visible again. This way, we make the text only visible when this light passes over it. Perfect. Let's continue. We reactivate this texture, place it up here, and also make it an alpha matte for the shape. We put the light layer in overlay mode and lower the texture's opacity a bit. To prevent the animation from stopping when it reaches this keyframe, we need to make a small adjustment. With it selected, we go back to the graphics editor and move these handles down a bit. That's why we've activated the continuous option, so we can move them as if they were one. Now it looks perfect. Notice how it moves very slowly, but it doesn't stop. We're going to do a small animation to the scale, mark a keyframe, and deactivate this chain so we can modify the dimensions separately. We set it to 0 for X and 0 for Y. And towards the end of the animation, we set it back to 0 and smooth the last keyframe. we're going to add the turbulent displace effect to this composition. We'll set the amount to 10. Now, holding down the Alt key, we're going to click on the clock to type this expression. Posterize time. In parentheses, type 6. On the line below, we're going to type time times 300. This will give us a really cool jitter effect. We're also going to add the turbulent displace effect to this layer. We'll set the amount to 20 and the size to 2. This way, we'll make the edges look a little rough and less defined. We'll copy this effect and paste it onto the 2 text layers. Now, we're going to create shadows on some elements. I'm going to use a plugin called Shadow Studio, but I'll also show you how to do it with After Effects tools. I'm going to set the direction to 210 and the master opacity to 20. The truth is that the shadows this plugin creates are fantastic, but if you don't have it installed, you can also do it without it. I'm going to disable it for now, and I'm going to duplicate this composition. I'm going to add a black fill to the bottom one, and also the radial fast blur effect. I'm going to move this handle around there, and I'm going to leave this value at about 85. Look, we can get some really cool shadows. If we want, we can lower the opacity a little. I'm going to delete this composition and reactivate the effect. I'm going to paste it to these other 2 compositions. We're almost there. We're going to activate motion blur on all these layers, and on the layers in scene 1 as well. In the compositions folder, we're going to create another one called Effects Montage. We'll leave everything as is, and here we'll add the montage layer. Right-click to create an adjustment layer for color correction. Adding the tint effect, and the one called tritone. With this effect, we can change to warm, cool, etc. tones, and choose what suits us best. I'll leave it as default, but I'll clarify it a bit. This other adjustment layer will create a slight blur between the transitions. add the camera lens blur effect. Set this value to 15 and animate the blur right where the transition marks are. Smooth out these two keyframes, copy, and paste them into the second transition. On this other adjustment layer, we're going to add the posterized time effect. And instead of displaying the animation at 30 frames, we're going to change the frame rate to 15. This effect looks really cool on some animations. Let's preview everything to see how it looks. This looks incredible. On this adjustment layer, we're going to add the vignette effect. And leave it as default. If we want, we can duplicate it to darken the edges a bit more. On this last adjustment layer, we're going to create a general blur, but only around the edges of the composition. So we're going to double-click the ellipse tool to create this mask, set it to subtract mode, make it a little smaller, and increase the feathering to about 300. Finally, we're going to create the halftone effect, so characteristic of Julian's videos. We duplicate this composition and we are left with only it. We'll add two effects. The first, called extract, and also the tint effect. If we move these sliders on the extract effect, it eliminates the dark parts of the image and leaves us with only the highlights and brightness. But if we invert the effect, it reveals only the shadows and dark parts, which is exactly what we want. By moving this slider below, we can soften the extraction. But as I always do, I'm going to set the exact values. Here, I set it to 100 and the softness to 45. Now I'm going to add this halftone texture to the composition and scale it a bit as it's too large. To fill in all the empty spaces, we add the CC Reptile effect and increase the expansion by 3,500 pixels on all sides. From Repeat, we change to Unfold. Depending on how large we want the halftone effect, we can increase or decrease the scale. Now, we have to make this texture an alpha matte of the composition, and here comes the good part. If we put it in multiply mode, we get this really cool effect. And look, the halftone effect is only affecting the shadows and dark areas, which is exactly what I wanted. Look how cool the eye texture looks. We can increase or decrease the size of the points. Here on the text layer, I want to increase the size of this phrase a little. I see something strange here. Okay, it's this texture. I've lowered the scale too much, and you can see empty spaces. We can scale it up or increase these values a little. I don't know how many of you have made it this far, but I want to make a couple of corrections that I'm not entirely convinced about. For this shape layer, I'm going to move the mask a little to the left, since it doesn't allow the text to be seen quite right. So I'm going to select these 2 points and move it a little. Now the text looks much better. I'm also going to cut this layer at the second transition and paint it the same color as the layers in its group. When the text is no longer visible in the composition, I'm going to cut it at that point, so it won't be visible again at the end. I'm going to make the texture a little bigger. A little bigger. All that's left is to add the audio layer, and now we have this incredible animation finished and working perfectly. If you get stuck at any step or there's something you don't understand, write to me in the comments and we'll fix it. And if you liked the tutorial, leave me a big like so I know. See you in the next video.